So here's a question you hear debated all the time. Who really poses the bigger threat on the world stage today? Is it the United States or is it China?
It's a huge question and often framed in, well, pretty stark terms.
Exactly. And today, we're going to explore that by looking closely at the arguments made by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, from Columbia University.
Ah, yes. In his recent video, he really tackled this head on, didn't he?
He did. So our aim here is to unpack what he actually said, the facts and the perspectives he laid out to give you a clearer picture of his viewpoint on this whole complex dynamic.
Right. And knowing Professor Sachs, you can probably guess his answer isn't just picking one side or the other. It's more nuanced.
Definitely.
We'll look at the numbers he uses, the qualitative points he makes, drawing straight from his analysis, really, to help you form your own view.
Okay, so let's start where he starts. He pretty directly challenges the whole idea that China's rise is some kind of major military threat, especially to American dominance.
Yeah, he kicks off with some pretty specific statistics to back that up.
What are those key numbers he focuses on?
Well, first, he makes a really striking point. China, he says, has been involved in 0 wars in the last 40 years. 0.
40 years.
Their last conflict, he notes, was that short one with Vietnam back in early '79, tied to Cambodia.
Okay, so no recent wars. What else?
Then he talks about military presence, like actual boots on the ground overseas. He states China has basically one confirmed foreign military base.
Well, one.
In Djibouti, yeah. Mainly for naval stuff, repairs. He acknowledges there's maybe some debate, possibly 2 to 4 total, but that's it.
And how does that compare to the U.S.?
Well, that's his main contrast. He says the U.S. has around 750 overseas military bases.
750.
Yeah. So for Sachs, that sheer quantitative difference, it fundamentally changes how you should perceive aggression or threat globally.
Okay, so if a country isn't starting wars or building this huge global network of bases, the argument is, can you really call its rise a military threat?
That seems to be his core point on the military side.
But he also tackles the narrative around Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, which is obviously very prominent in the West. How does he handle that?
He approaches that quite directly. He calls it a game of Western narratives.
That game?
Yeah, and he compares the focus on it to, say, the situation in Gaza, where he points out, tens of thousands are being killed. He implies a sort of disproportionate attention.
So he's questioning the framing.
Exactly. He concedes, he says, bad things could be happening in Xinjiang, but he's very firm that it's not genocide. He says China is not mass murdering its population.
I see.
So for him, it's about looking critically at these narratives and considering perhaps the geopolitical interests driving them.
Okay, interesting. So summarizing this part, Sachs is saying, look at the data, China's military footprint, its recent history. It looks very different from the standard threat narrative. He's asking us to reconsider that whole perception.
Precisely. And from there, he turns his focus squarely onto the United States' role in all this. He argues the U.S. perceives China as a threat, not because of Chinese military action, but because China's economic success challenges what he calls American primacy.
Okay, American primacy.
Yeah.
That term feels really important to his argument. Can you unpack what he means by that?
Sure. For Sachs, American primacy seems to mean that sort of post-Cold War status where the U.S. was, largely seen as the sole superpower, setting the global agenda economically, politically.
The indispensable nation, as some called it.
Kind of, yeah. And China's incredible economic growth, its tech advancements, that directly challenges that singular top dog position the U.S. has held for decades.
So it's the economic rise that's seen as the real provocation.
That's what Sachs argues. He actually points to a specific Council on Foreign Relations article from 2015 by Robert Blackwell and Ashley Tellis. And it apparently stated, pretty bluntly, that China's rise is no longer in America's interest.
Wow. Okay. So it's not about tanks. It's about the balance of economic power upsetting the established order.
That's the reframe Sachs presents. It shifts the focus.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because Sachs then links this perceived challenge to specific U.S. actions, ways it exercises power globally. Tell us about the history of covert regime change he discusses.
Right. This is a major part of his critique of U.S. foreign policy. He starts with the CIA's creation in 1947.
Okay.
And he cites academic work, like from Lindsay O'Rourke, who documented, I think, 64 covert regime change operations by the U.S. just between 47 and 89.
64. And that's just up to 89.
Yeah. And Sachs adds that he personally knows of many more since then. He also has this sort of ironic take on the word covert.
How so?
He says, the U.S. officially denies involvement, but often everybody kind of knows what happened. The covert part, he suggests, is really just the official denial.
Plausible deniability, basically.
Pretty much, and he gives a really stark example. Haiti, President Aristide, between 2001 and 2004.
What happened there, according to Sachs?
Sachs says he actually witnessed the U.S. putting the financial squeeze on Haiti, blocking IMF loans, World Bank loans. And then he describes the U.S. ambassador literally escorting Aristide onto an unmarked plane.
No way.
Which then flew him off to the Central African Republic. Sachs calls it a coup in broad daylight, but says it was largely just ignored by the mainstream press.
That's a powerful anecdote to illustrate his point about interventionism.
Definitely. He uses it to show a pattern.
Okay, so moving from historical examples to something very current and very contested, Ukraine. Sachs apparently has a long history there, advising the government way back in the 90s.
Yes, since 94, I believe.
So how does he view the origins of the current war? Because his perspective seems to really challenge the standard timeline.
It really does. He holds a very, let's say, controversial view. He argues the U.S. has been essentially using Ukraine.
Using Ukraine how?
To push military bases closer and closer to Russia. He believes there's this kind of underlying goal in Washington. He calls it a meme of Washington.
A meme?
Yeah, like a persistent idea or objective to weaken Russia. Maybe even, he suggests, to induce Russia to break up along ethnic lines.
That's a pretty extreme claim.
It is. And he insists the war didn't start in 2022. He says it literally started in 2014.
With the Maidan Revolution.
Yes, which he directly attributes to U.S. involvement in, quote, yet another coup.
Does he offer specifics on that?
He does. He points to that leaked phone call between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piet, the U.S. ambassador then, in late January 2014.
Right, where they seem to be discussing the makeup of the next Ukrainian government.
Exactly. And then Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who they mentioned favorably, became prime minister on February 22nd. For Sachs, that sequence is damning. His fundamental point is that the U.S. shouldn't be overthrowing governments, especially not when it means putting military infrastructure right up against a nuclear power like Russia.
And he connects this to warnings from the past.
Absolutely. He emphasizes that senior U.S. diplomats, people like George Kennan back in 97, 98, Jack Matlock, Bill Perry, they all warned against expanding NATO, warned it would destabilize Ukraine and provoke Russia.
So he sees this as a predictable outcome based on U.S. policy choices.
That's his argument. And it leads him to state very directly, I don't trust the Americans.
Wow. Coming from someone who advised Ukraine, that's quite a statement. It really highlights his conviction.
It does. And he doesn't see these as just isolated incidents, Haiti, Ukraine.
Right. He seems to place it all in a much bigger historical picture, doesn't he? Connecting U.S. actions to, the legacy of empires.
Exactly. He draws this very bold historical parallel. He talks about 19th century Britain.
Okay.
He calls Britain the biggest gangster back then, controlling maybe 25% of the world's land, invading practically everywhere. He cites a figure that Britain didn't invade only 23 countries.
That's incredible.
And Sachs argues the U.S. basically learned everything we know about empire from the British. He describes it almost like a handover of the baton.
A handover. When?
At the end of World War II. From Churchill to Truman, as he puts it. He thinks this sort of megalomania really took hold in the U.S. after the war.
Megalomania.
Yeah, citing that phrase, present at the creation, which symbolized the start of the so-called American-led world.
I see. So connecting the past empire to present primacy.
Precisely. And he brings it back to those numbers. He stresses again that U.S. foreign policy today is just quantitatively different from everyone else's.
The 750 bases.
The 750 bases are the prime example for him. He does note Britain is still number 2 with over 100 bases, which he sees as a legacy of its empire. But the U.S. scale is unique.
So for Sachs, understanding this imperial history, this hand over the scale, is crucial to understanding U.S. actions now.
That's the framework he presents, yes. These aren't just random events. They fit into a historical pattern, in his view.
Well, this has been really illuminating, digging into Professor Sachs's arguments. If we try to pull it all together, his core point seems to be this. China, despite its economic power, has been relatively restrained militarily, based on his data. Whereas the U.S.
The U.S., with its massive global military network and its history of interventions, presents a fundamentally different kind of challenge, a challenge rooted in maintaining that primacy.
So he's really flipping the standard question of who the threat is, or at least asking us to define threat differently.
Exactly. He's inviting you, the listener, to really weigh the evidence he presents, the historical context, the numbers, the specific events, and to question the prevailing narratives you might hear elsewhere.
Yeah, to think critically about why certain countries are labeled threats and others aren't, perhaps.
Right. What are the underlying reasons?
And it definitely leaves you with a big thought to chew on. If Professor Sachs's analysis holds weight, what are the consequences for global stability when the world's leading power sees another major nation's economic success as an existential threat?
What are the real costs of that mindset, that focus on maintaining primacy above all else?
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for walking us through Sachs's perspective.
Glad to do it. It's certainly a thought-provoking analysis.